Hello, everybody, and welcome to Palcast. And I am not Yusuf Al Jamal in Sakarya, Turkey. I am Tony Groves in Dublin, and Yusuf should be along shortly, but we've had a little bit of a timing issue. So, unfortunately, you're stuck with my big orangey red mush. But as fate would have it, I'm rejoined on the podcast on the Tortoise Shack for the first time in a while. In a while,
Yeah,
by Issam Adwan. He's a Palestinian researcher whose work bridges international media, grassroots activism, academic inquiry. He's worked as a journalist for global outlets, including the Associated Press, the Al Jazeera English, and has done frontline coverage from Gaza and investigative reports long before October 7th, as listeners who will recall Issam. His contributions to the Tortoise Shack and our mutual respect for our late friend. I must bring it's Dr. Rifat Al Arir who connected us, I believe, at the time initially. Isam, it's very good to see you. And I'm 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 sorry to bring it up on such at an early stage, but we have to acknowledge our lost friend.
yeah, of course. It's such a difficult time for everybody, and Farhad's loss is such an unfortunate loss for everybody uh, who knew him. So yeah, I'm happy to be here to speak again about Palestine.
Yeah. Isam, you've I recall having conversation with you because you were one of the journalists reporting on the ground after October 7th and what was happening. You might bring us up to speed about your experience of what it was like during the genocide, and then your displacement and how that has all gone to where you are
Yeah,
now.
yeah, of course. Tani, what happened? What is happening? Not happened. I hope that it happened, but it is still happening to before our eyes in live streams and on social media. You can see what is going on in Gaza. Still famine exists, still Israel incursions and bombing taking place every single minute that we're speaking. um, so what started in Gaza was a pure utter genocide by definition and by means and by practice. I've worked in Gaza for many wars. I was born and raised in Gaza initially, and I have survived various wars. And I worked professionally as a journalist reporting from front lines of various wars, starting of during the Great March of Return, 2018 until 2021. And I've seen people losing their lives basically because they are protesting bare souls and bodies to demand the rightful United Nations Resolution number 194. I've documented various escalations and wars in Gaza, including to 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. So you rarely hear about a war taking place in Gaza because some of these might take place for a couple of days, for 10 days, 11 days maximum. So it it's not getting the attention that it's supposed to get because not thousands of people are dying as we have documented after the 7th of October attacks. Since this particular war started, the ground realities that we have witnessed and documented, they are just beyond imagination. We have seen people losing their lives in mass. We have seen children's bodies ripped off because of an airstrike, indiscriminate airstrike. We have documented those thousands of times. So, but what happened in this particular war was just beyond this brutality. It's just beyond imagination to the extent that even the most experienced journalists, their hearts were torn apart because of the scenes that we have seen and we have documented. We talk about not only thousands of lives shredded apart, but we talk about future as well. We talk about generations and generations. They will live in these circumstances, in the unknown, in this currently famine in Gaza, in this blockade of aid, of medicine, of even the possibilities of reconstruction, of even for education, is almost impossible. So the situation is overwhelming to all of us, but to journalists, it's even more because we know what is beyond these headlines that might, you might confront through your social media work or browsing of news outlets. We know the numbers of hundreds of people dying. We know the names. We know the families. We know their loved ones. It is utterly devastating to imagine that throughout the work and the documentation of this war, you can remember hundreds of families' names who were entirely killed. Their entire family were wiped out from the civil registry. It is terrifying to imagine that a whole family of more than 70, 80, 100, 150, 200 sometimes, those entire families were killed, and their names were wiped from the civil registry. It's utterly devastating to imagine that this death toll of Gaza, currently recorded of about 70,000 people killed, you can document like 15,000, at least 15,000 of them, they are children. You can document as well about the same number of women, about similar number of elderly. So this indiscriminate practice of killing, we have seen this before, but not as cruel as we have documented in this war. It's taking us to another level that we have not expected. And even in the worst nightmares we have, imagined, we couldn't imagine such brutality and such indiscriminate targeting of residential buildings, of entire towers containing hundreds of families, even to the extent before my evacuation from Gaza in April 2024. My own house was crammed of over 120 people inside. And I know all of the houses in Rafah, the place that the Israeli military issued evacuations order to, from the northern sides of Gaza, basically evacuating more than 1.5 million civilians from northern Gaza to a small city, my city, Rafah, that is now entirely erased. They evacuated those people to evacuate to the city, and all of the houses contained at least 100 civilians, children, women, families evacuated from northern Gaza. So in each airstrike, slamming on a house in Rafah, I know the casualties. At least we're speaking of 50, 70, 80, 100 of civilians killed. So these realities also reflected on our lives as journalists. In comparison to the previous wars, we have known that journalists are usually targeted by the Israeli military. I have seen this firsthand. I've experienced this firsthand during my work during the Great March of Return, and the discrediting attempts, the usual discredit attempts by the Israeli administration
Can
and
I
organizations. Yeah,
can I come in on that? Because
yeah,
again, if people recall, 4 or 5 years ago when we first spoke, there was always pressure on journalists on the ground who were reporting the facts to stop reporting the facts because you're making
yeah,
life uncomfortable for the Israeli regime. And what was really crucial at the time is that the Netanyahu government, the coalition that had just come to power with Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and had been, at that point was already the most right wing government in the history of the Israeli state, is what we were seeing as played out. But it's important before October 7th, and you had said this to me, that
yeah.
the highest number of people who had been killed in any year was taking place. So the slow murder of citizens was already speeding up before the attacks of October 7th. Is that a fair assessment of where we were in the build up to October 7th?
Yes, definitely. This is what rarely gets seen when we talk about Palestine and Israel. That 2023, before the attack of the 7th of October, it was the deadliest year for Palestinians. As far as I remember, more than 250 Palestinians were killed before the 7th of October. So these numbers, go unseen by the Western media in particular. But this was the year of the most far-right Israeli, government and officials gathering in the same government calling for the death of Palestinians. With the and after the attacks of the October, the 7th, uh, these calls were utterly obvious, calling Palestinian civilians as human animals, calling for their starvation, calling for the mass killing. It was like this
Asking,
rhetoric. Yeah,
we're bringing up Amalek, and people forget this now. The Amalek,
yeah,
they literally meant wipe them off the map. That's what
yeah,
that was the biblical reference that they meant.
yeah. And even those, deliberate, clear statements, they are usually ignored in Western media outlets. I mean, as a journalist, it's such a shame to see that your colleagues are deliberately hiding or ignoring statements, genocidal statements like those. It's a pure utter genocide uttered by them. It's not even before being investigated and before being, having findings and talking about testimonies. You can clearly look at their initial statements about their reaction to Gaza's 7th of October, to Hamas's 7th of October attacks. And I remember it was one of the shocking, conversations that I've seen in Israeli media in particular, because we talk about the media that is fully supportive of the actions of the Israeli regime, is that one of the Israeli known war analysts talking about Netanyahu being a fool of how he reacted to the attack of the 7th of October. And, the correspondent, the presenter asked him why, because he said, we had a green light to kill more than 100,000 of people in Gaza. And he did not do that. So what it means, it was the rhetoric preparing for a mass killing of Palestinians in Gaza. And most of these rhetorics were hidden or were ignored by the Western media outlets trying to claim the so-called neutrality of reporting, but that was far from the truth. It was an utter contribution to what we are witnessing of results today. A mass killing of Palestinians, goals, being ignored, famine being claimed false, and currently the current seizure of Israeli military of more than 45% of Gaza's area still goes ignored by the most of the Western media outlets and international organizations as well.
Yeah, and it's important to point out to listeners at this point that much of the land they're taking was the land that would be arable, that could provide some sort of food or crop or something, and so they're being strategic even in that, in terms of the ethnic cleansing. But I'm reminded of the last time we spoke. You had a wonderful calligraphy behind you, and you don't now. So you've
Yeah.
clearly been displaced, and can you tell us a little bit about your own personal story, if you don't mind, Sam? Because I
Yeah.
remember, I think I brought up to you several times how I loved seeing that image. When you came on the screen, there was this amazing calligraphy behind you,
Yeah.
and now it's just a generic wall,
Yeah.
like my own. But please, bring us up to speed of how that journey
Of
was for
course.
you.
Yeah. I mean, my story is the least painful story among thousands and thousands of journalists. More than 200 of them already lost their lives while doing their work reporting from the ground. So I hope my words are not taken for granted as a representation of the whole journalist experiences. Yes, I've lost a home, I've lost a life, I've lost many of my friends, and also family members. But when we talk about the grief and cruelty journalists have faced in Gaza, I would be the least to speak of. The journalist experiences in general and mine is that we have been discredited, we have been attacked, we have been called names of supporting terrorism. We have been called many things. To my experience, to my own experience, I was called of being supporter of terrorism. I was called of being anti-Israel, of being anti-Semitic, and many other names that we usually get being called of during previous wars reporting. But this was altering to various forms that our lives were on danger as well. So I, you know, a smearing campaign is started against the majority of journalists in Gaza, including myself. And in one of the days during my coverage, my very next neighbor's house was attacked, and a few members of my family were injured. Almost, you know, my house was also partially destroyed. So when I realized, despite working for a global outlet like the Associated Press, which our coordinates are usually provided to the Israeli military in cases, of attacks in the premise of our existence, they usually notify us as security clearance that we have to make. But despite these regular, and I mean hourly coordinations with the Israeli military to maintain the safety of journalists working for global outlets like the Associated Press. My very next neighbor, I mean, wall to wall, Tani, was attacked, and a few members of my family were injured. And in these conversations with the security department in my agency, they said, we don't know how to protect you in the first place. I mean, every place that the Israeli military claimed of being safe area for civilians, we have documented civilians dying in these areas, despite being like a desert like. There's no sanitation, there's no housing, there's no, sewage system. It's absolutely desert that you force people to live in tents that burning their skins during summer, and they are freezing to death in winter. So, to my experience, once my neighbor was attacked, I felt these smearing campaigns and these, social media harassment and death threats that I have received personally. I feel they're no joke like
Mm.
previous wars. Yeah, I could take them like lightly before and laugh about them that people are, trying to kill me or something because I'm doing my work as a journalist. But witnessing the death among my colleagues was altering. It terrified me, not on the aspect of living my life myself, because most of the journalists, honestly, in Gaza, they know that they could lose their lives doing this work. And we continue to do that, believing that it might be our time at some point. It was by the fact that I initially talked to you about that my house was crammed with more than 120 people inside, including my nuclear family, my big family, extended family, and also I had friends. I had another colleague from the Associated Press and her family as well. So believing in and imagining that you could be a reason of the death of this mass number, it's a heavy burden. I believe every journalist in Gaza felt the same. If it was an intentional targeting for myself, for me alone, I would have gladly continued to do the work, because if I'm dying for the cause, if I'm dying for, telling the truth, this is what the profession is about. We're not supposed to lose lives in the first place, but we realize that being a journalist is just another crosshair on your head. Uh,
Your hero was Shireen Al Akbar. This is we had this conversation, I recall,
yeah,
about you doing impressions of Shireen.
yeah.
So
I mean, being a journalist in Gaza, or in Palestine in general, it's just this intuition of you want to help those civilians, dying. You want to tell their truth. It pains me the most to imagine that the story of a child goes as means of numbers. This child is dying without being recognized. This family losing a loved member without being recognized. Nobody talks about their lives. Nobody talks about their dreams and their lives that were cut short by this brutality. That's why I was, I have been interested in becoming a journalist in the first place, despite that my education background is entirely different. I came from an education and linguistics, domain, and I became a journalist out of, just the pure feeling of responsibility that I want these lives to be recognized. Yes, they are lost in such an unfortunate matter, but it's a duty for every capable person to tell their stories. That's why I started journalism in the first place. So realizing within this war that this responsibility of not only telling the truth, but also you could be the reason why people around you are dying.
mm,
It's just a burden that nobody can tolerate. And up in my conversations with many friends who faced similar conditions of smearing campaigns, of death threats, of even attacks on their homes and their relatives, etc. Even with my talks to them, I do not blame them if they stopped working, because it's not about our lives that we're sacrificing. We're sacrificing tens, if not even hundreds, of our family members, of our friends, of our colleagues, of those that we host, even strangers we host at our houses. So it's not a matter of you losing your life because of what you do. It's a matter of hundreds of people that could
you're
be
you're
killed.
you're li you're literally taking the burden
Exactly.
of the of
And it happened to many of us, Tony, to be clear. It
yeah.
happened to many of us, still alive journalists who lost their entire family members, who lost their friends, who were targeted because this member of a family is a journalist or this friend is a journalist. And Israel usually claims that this house contained the terrorists, etc. But we know it's a pure attack on journalism in the first place. It's not a new topic, Tony. This is what people
No,
do
but it
not
was
realize.
but after October 7th, you were right to say that the threats and the pressure that was put upon people generally were to ruin you professionally, ruin you, to make sure you couldn't get work, you couldn't provide for your family. But this became, no, we're going to kill you. And then it became actually, we're not just going to kill you, we're going to kill your family. I mean, the
Of
journalist
course,
Abu Bakr Abed, who is now in Dublin, that was effectively one of the reasons he had to leave, was because they were
of
saying,
course,
we, folks, you understand, Daddy's Home was one of the programs they use. So they would wait for someone who was a target, and I'm using air quotes here, to return to their home, and then they would target that no matter who was in the home with them. Um,
of course. And this is, Tony, also the experience that is also, you know, it get worse by also the community realizing that journalists are exposed, they're being deliberately targeted, to the extent that even those communities and those families are starting to avoid or instructing out of, care. We understand the risks of your profession, but if there is like 1% of a risk that you could be targeted in your house, in the family house, then it's more proper. And this is like the casual instructions for journalists. Try to avoid going to your home. Try to avoid any places that could be, a densely area of people, of tents, etc. Because you've done nothing wrong in the first place, but you could be a potential target in these circumstances during this war. This is something, again, Tony, that we have documented before. I've lost many friends, including Yasser Murtaja, during the Great March of Return. And in this particular war, we're talking about more than 200 journalists, colleagues that I've known personally and I worked with for years and years. They were decent people. They only cared about, reporting realities taking place in Gaza. So it's such an unfortunate loss, not only to the community of Gaza and the journalists of Gaza, but also to the international community as well, because those are the truth bearers and
yeah.
should have been protected. And failing to protect them is not a failure of journalists themselves, but it's a failure on our humanity in the first place. Out of this experience, and because I was one of the fortunate people working for a global outlet like the Associated Press, and because of the alarming danger of journalists facing and their their inability to protect us as journalists, they realized that okay, we wanted an evacuation plan for our staff. You're allowed to, we will do our best and you're allowed to evacuate if you desire so. And the majority of journalists working for global outlets, they did evacuate because basically those are pressures of life insurances over the lives of those journalists. So their agencies tried to avoid and taking more risks of losing their lives. And of course, this would result them in paying, high compensations to their families because they lost their lives in such an
But
unfortunate
but I
circumstance.
want for the you're underselling it a little bit, because I said I've known you for quite a while,
Yeah.
and I understand that the threats to you were specific. You were definitely one of the people who was pointed at, as in,
Yeah.
you were under a shadow because of the caliber of the reporting that you did.
Yeah,
Not just after October 7th, but for the longest time beforehand. You
of
know,
course, yeah,
a really good communicator, clearly someone who knows, his English is impeccable and he can speak to the world, which is one of the things about Rifat would say, tell our stories. And that was
yeah,
why, Issam, you have been so effective in what you're doing, and that's why you were targeted very early.
yeah,
And I want to be very clear on this. There's no judgment here for anybody who made the decision to leave, and there's a specific no
of course,
judgment
yeah,
because you are you're a parent as well.
yeah.
I mean,
I mean, it was one of the most difficult decisions that I have taken in my life. Um, Being on the crossroad of risking everything on particularly my child, and trying to save whatever I can save from my family members. So I was offered an evacuation. I initially, for a long, long time, I refused it, and I thought, okay, if my family evacuate, you know, I'll stay in Gaza just to report, and this risk potential of targeting my family would be much less to me. It would be, less painful if losing my entire family. Some of my family members are still in Gaza. I have three brothers and almost 17 nieces and nephews. So this is also altering for me. But I thought, okay, if I can save at least five of them, 10 of them, whatever number that I can save from my family members, it would mean less dangers and it would be less painful to lose, if they decided to attack me by an airstrike. So when I realized that it's the only way that I can save some of my family members, I decided, and of course, saving my daughter Sarah in the first place, because this emotional burden of bringing a child in these conditions, to any parent, it's just overwhelming to realize that this child, Sarah in particular, survived three different wars in a 3.5 years old of her life.
I can
So it's
I need to interrupt for a moment because if you're new to the podcast and the podcast and the work that we do, all of my Palestinian friends would always say, you'd ask, "Oh, how old are you?" And they would say, "I'm 9 wars old."
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's this sense of dark humor that kills every single one of us, I believe. To those realize that a child 3 years old and a half, and she survives three wars, and of course one of them is a genocide. So out of this overwhelming feeling of responsibility that I brought this child to this life, and surviving, how the world views us as a curse, uh, because basically we live as neighbors to Israel, and realizing all of these harsh, feelings, I decided to evacuate, and take my child with me. And once I saw the names on the list of evacuations by the Egyptian authorities, the feeling was very difficult, because yes, I am saving part of my family, a small part of my family, but also I'm leaving about a 23rd behind. I'm leaving three of my older brothers, and also, as I said, 17 of my nieces and nephews. And those children were basically raised in my lap. I used to raise them. I used to hug them. I used to take them for walks. I used to celebrate with them the birthdays. So it's that much closeness and intimacy that it's part of my identity as well. Home is not the only identity that I've lost. I've lost most of my network. I've lost family members. I've lost connection to my family right now as well, those remaining in Gaza. I've lost connection to many of my friends, many of those academics that I've known personally, including my friend Dr. Rifat Al-Aradir. I've lost my university. I've lost my neighborhood. My entire city has been wiped
Rafa's
out.
been erased. Yeah.
Yeah. So
The safe zone of Rafa has been
this is the
erased.
zone that has been, have been always acclaimed of being a safe haven for people to evacuate to. And trust me when I say this, it's too much that whatever experience we have gained through the past wars, it's more than that. It's more than anybody can handle. And this is maybe the moment to just salute the work of journalists who remained in Gaza, reporting for more than 2 years under these unbearable conditions. Those are the true heroes that should be celebrated. But and trust me, they hate to be called heroes. They're
Mhm.
just simply human beings trying to survive. And I realize this because they're my friends, and we almost talk like daily about the conditions in Gaza. They are the true people that deserves a medal for what they have been doing for over than 2 years. So when I evacuated to Egypt, it's like a huge part of me was lost. And being a journalist and also documenting the war from far, it's just another sad story that I usually tell to my friends and during my reporting. Because even if I'm not witnessing these deaths, with my own eyes, even if I'm not talking to those people like face to face, and just witnessing their facial expressions of grief, and so many other painful feelings that would be clearly showing on their face, and tears, and heartbreak, and so many other things. Even if I'm not facing them like face to face, I still feel these pains, because it's been like thousands and thousands of times we have documented the same stories. It goes over and over again. It's happening over and over again. A story of a child lost, story of a grieving mother, losing her child, a story of an entire family wiped out from the civil registry, and there is a one survivor, a child most likely. So these stories, you just can't. To some extent they become like part of you. They become part of your feeling, part of your nightmares, part of your life, and part of whatever you're doing in life. And trust me when I say whatever, because currently I'm a PhD student, but I'm also conducting a research on the situation in Gaza. So it's even if you leave Gaza, as we usually say, those who evacuated Gaza or living outside Gaza, even if you left Gaza, Gaza never leaves you. It's just the reality. The whole situation. It to some extent it's even more painful sometimes, because there were times with the telecommunications blackout, media blackout. We rarely hear anything about the conditions in Gaza, and you know the last communication. The last communication was about targeting in a certain area that a family, a friend, or even my own family members, and then it's a blackout. You know nothing, and you survive for 3, 4, 5 days, a week, without having a word from your own family.
You wait, you
So
wait, you wait on those WhatsApp messages to go double tick. You wait on word from anybody
exactly,
who knows you.
you just wait for any single sign
Mm.
that your family is still alive, your friends are still alive, and
You
it's
you
just
you're living a half a life, Issam,
yeah,
because you've got to continue your life with your research and your PhD studies, and as a parent and as a provider, but you also have a life that you have compartmentalized into what's happening in Gaza and how it has changed things. And I can see, I know this is an audio podcast, but I can see the sadness in your eyes.
yeah,
And I think the last couple of years have changed everybody. And if you haven't been changed by it, I don't know what sort of human you are.
yeah,
Because it certainly had an impact on me personally as well, and I can see, as I said, the sadness in your eyes. But I'd like to kind of conclude, if you don't mind. How do you see the future? What do you think of in terms of the possibility of an optimistic future relative to the current situation and the maniacal plans of the Trump Riviera and all this
yeah,
bullshit?
yeah. I mean, I wish I can say positive words when I imagine a future. It's just disastrous, apocalyptic, monstrous. This is uh, what we are currently seeing on not only the situation of Gaza, but also the situation in the Middle East in general. We can see the attacks, the Israeli U.S. attacks on Iran. We can see the response from Iran to several, Arab nations as well. And it's this convention that makes you losing hope that we failed as humans. We failed to protect what should be protected. We failed to protect our children. We failed to protect our human rights. We failed to protect journalists. We failed to protect paramedics. We failed to protect our, innocent civilians. As a journalist, I acknowledge this failure. We have done our best as journalists in Gaza. We are still doing that. The majority of people, journalists remained in Gaza. You know, they're risking their lives still for more than 2 years. So this failure is not for them. It's for all of us outside Gaza, to be particular. All of us who are failed Lebanon, who failed Libya, who failed Syria, who failed Iran, who failed many, you know, thousands and thousands of civilians lost all across the Middle East. It's still happening. I wish I can see otherwise. I wish I can see, dreams of peace. I wish I can see dreams of calmness where our children are raised properly. And imagine, because I've experienced this as a parent firsthand, raising a child uh, from a war zone, it just beyond nightmare. And I'll just mention this one small thing. After we evacuated to Egypt, it was 2 a.m. in the morning when we arrived, and the bus dropped us at Nasser city in the middle of Al Qahira. It's such a busy city, even after midnight. And the first thing that Sarah heard, my daughter heard, once we drop off from the bus, was the sound of an airplane. So this sound in particular was usually attached to Sarah with death, with bombs. So she screamed her lungs out, despite that Sarah was not that child capable to express, horror in words. She was just screaming. And one of the very first words that Sarah uttered in particular, she said, "I'm scared." So imagining these conditions for all parents all over the world who have to face this, it's just beyond nightmare for all of us. So I wish I can say again, I wish I can say positive words of peace, calmness, I, you know, but I unfortunately I don't see them happening in the future.
I'm reminded of the last 48 hours and beyond, whereby the world got upset about the uh, Iran striking back at the US in Israeli attacks after they basically plumossed or quietly mentioned that an Israeli strike killed over 140 young
Yeah,
girls in a school.
yeah,
And I want to echo your sentiments that we have failed, because I feel that very much in my bones, that journalism has failed. I've said it often enough. I've said it over and
yeah,
over repeatedly. Western journalism has not done itself proud over the last couple of years, and we see it again, where the reporting again we saw, as usual, Israel says versus Iran strikes. And we are
yeah,
repeating the same formula, and we need to do better and demand better. And I say that as someone who's critical of the work that of people who I'm friends with and colleagues, and that we need to do better. But Issam, I'm so
yeah,
grateful that you gave us the time to have a chat today. I know it's very hard picking up the pieces and trying to start again. Um,
yeah,
but people, I do think there is a goodness that is going to shine through, because despite all of the pressure and the things that have happened, I do think the majority of people, I see it all the time, thousands of people on the streets everywhere I go, bumper stickers on cars supporting Palestine. People. I'm more known as the guy who did something, who spoke about Palestine, than I am for anything else. And that's not to say that I deserve any credit. I don't. But I'm simply saying that
yeah,
it breaks through. And
yeah.
I want to thank you as well for educating me in what was
Ah,
happening before October 7th. So I do want to do that. Look,
thank you.
folks, we're gonna leave it there. Yusuf will tell me I have to thank our co-sponsors, the Hashim Sami Centre in Malaysia, and the brilliant Just World Educational. By the way, Just World Educational are now putting some of these podcasts on their YouTube channel, so you can watch them. I would recommend that you go back and listen to one, because we had a visitor in the shape of a drone and a jet fighter, and the video adds something. So please go check out the great work of Just World Educational. Other than that, we will be back in your feeds next week. And thanks to everybody who continues to support this project and continues to speak up for the people in Palestine and Gaza. Talk to you soon. Take care. Bye bye.
The hospitals, the sacred rooms of the wounded, sick and dead. Those crowded halls, a last refuge. They can't be touched, it is said. They can't be touched by the weapons of war, weapons sent to destroy. They can't be touched, says the rule of law, that the world is protected by. But not in Gaza. But not in Gaza. But not in Gaza. But not in Gaza. cry for food to stay alive, a child's cry to be fed. Forced starvation is a crime, and it can't be used, it is said. It can't be used as a weapon of war, as an act of genocide. It can't be used, says the rule of law, that the world is protected by. But not in Gaza, but not in Gaza, but not in Gaza, but not in Gaza. Hospitals are not a target. Patients are not a target. Nurses are not a target. Doctors are not a target. Health workers are not a target. Aid workers are not a target. Journalists are not a target. Civilians are not a target. Children 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 are not a target.